without thinking. The Chinese were always concerned with what do you do before you think. That once you think, the act has been vitiated. It's not exactly vitiated, but its purity has been diminished. And the total sense of the Chinese was to develop a culture so deep in the person that the person would spontaneously do the thing, and that's why Mencher said the ideal, the good man, simply does the thing. You simply do it. Don't think, reward, punishment, this and that, the good and evil. It's just something so instinctive, you just do it. And there are all kinds of references as regards this. So this idea is, he said, therefore, the adult and the child must have an identity. The person himself must experience themselves falling into the well some way, or else that reaction would not be so strong. And then they argue, well, that's a human child. And he says, yeah, but if you see a bird wounded and crying in pain, you feel the compassion. So you must have this sense of identity. And it's based on, and so he goes on in this way, and he ends up with a wonderful passage. Everything from ruler, minister, husband, wife, and friends, to mountains, rivers, heavenly and earthly spirits, birds, animals, and plants, all should be truly loved in order to realize my humanity that forms the unity, and then my clear character will be completely manifested, and I will really form one body with heaven, earth, and the myriad things. That is what is meant by fully developing the human. So these I use, and I could go on to the Hindu world, to the Purusha concept of the Hindu world, with the Purusha concept of the universe in its as organic, and it's using the metaphors. Now, the metaphors do not mean exactly that the universe is kind of like a big human or a big human body, obviously, but it's simply that there is something profound in this organizational structure of the universe that make this the most appropriate and the most penetrating, the most profound way of understanding the universe. And that's why, again, with the Hindu world, there's the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad. One of these Upanishads are their glorious mystical treatises that were written from around 1000 BC to about 500, around there, and which gave expression, it's in some ways a unique body of literature in the human community. And one of the greatest, called the Great Upanishad, the Brihadaranyaka, opens with the horse sacrifice, and the horse is seen as the cosmic reality. And the idea is that, and that there is a sacrificial aspect of the universe as well as this glorious, joyful manifestation of the universe. The sacrificial and the joyous are interlinked in any of our discussions with the obstacle, with pain and so forth. It has to come back to what I would call the sacrificial component, or the aspect of the way in which we deal with the universe. So in line with the contemporary scientific sense, I think we can come back to these thoughts with a new sense of what they are saying, because there is a certain richness to what's being communicated. And it's why I suggest that our sciences are, in some sense, not revealing to us more than earlier people knew, but are revealing it to us differently. They're giving us the empirical data of what humans have always understood, because I think a person might say, or at least my opinion, of the something like the archetypal world of the unconscious of the human. I think there is a component of the human, that is that the psychic structure of the human begins where the universe begins. It's not simply that our bodies begin with the fireball, our souls begin with the fireball, our intelligence begins there. Everything begins there, and everything has structured itself from within our psychic structure so that we have a psychic impress, an abiding psychic impress from the beginning. So that there is nothing that we do not get to inwardly as well as outwardly. And that the great genius of Jung, well, he never knew, and this is one of the things, and how I would develop this is there is a book written by someone named Stevens on the biological basis of the archetypal structures of the deep unconscious. And I think it is a most important thing to develop, and it's a strong thing with me that when we come to this cultural coding, it's very interesting, and it's why I think that the Chinese have a deeper overlap between the genetic coding and the cultural coding. The human is by definition that being who is genetically coded for a further transgenetic cultural coding that bestows the proper human quality of life. We are human from the beginning because we are genetically coded, say, to speak, genetically coded to society, but how we speak, the language we speak, is our cultural coding that we create. In other words, every being creates itself, but humans in a special way create themselves. That's why we have such a prolonged childhood. As Brian was saying about the universe, some planets, they harden too quickly, they can't go anywhere. And so the limitations of the different phases of life come about because their development is firmed too quickly. They mature too quickly. The human remains a child, remains in the world of play for a longer period. And in that sense, the cultural range of development becomes enlarged, and so but we have to at the same time have to remember the curve. We have to create a coherent cultural tradition, but something that has a certain structure, but is constantly moving in a creative direction. But when we create our culture, it's not purely arbitrary, and if it were purely arbitrary, then it would not fall into line. If we're completely determined, then we wouldn't be human. If we were completely arbitrary, we would be disconnected with the rest of creation. So that it's got to have a continuity, discontinuity. In other words, the curve is more open at our level than it is with the pre-human level. But it is a curve that has to be managed in relationship to the larger dimensions of the universe. That's why human affection is so deeply and ultimately rooted in that psychic attraction that every physical thing has for every other physical reality, that every atom has for every other atom. It's drawn to intimacy with, as well as being differently articulated. And I hope Brian, before the group, before we end our discussion here, talks a little bit about these three principles of reality: the differentiation, subjectivity, and communion. Because it just is fascinating, the differentiation in, say, an electron. No electron is doing what the other is doing. It's a different being. You know, we get all these laws, electrons. Just like there are no two humans, that are just humans. Everybody's almost humans, are almost different species. That's why we have trouble. But but as we articulate ourselves, we need to keep resonant with these deeper laws of the universe, because the laws of reality are the laws of the human. The laws of life are the laws of the human. The laws of the heavens are the laws of the human. But the human takes it a step further. But it's not that different in one sense. It's moving it to a new phase. But if it loses its continuity, then the curve explodes or collapses. The curve is just remarkable as a point of reference, because it's the most profound ordering principle of the universe. And it has to do with the simple fact of the rate of emergence of the universe. And that is what holds things together, and is over a period of time, it articulates itself differently, and there's a deeper inner articulation of that curve. It takes place. That's why at every level there is an activation of something, but it's an activation of a quality of the universe. That's why Teilhard de Chardin has a wonderful phrase in one of his letters where he says that the human must be understood primarily through, it is primarily a cosmic reality. Primarily a cosmic reality, to be understood by physics, chemistry, biology, geology, and biology. He is not primarily an aesthetic, moral, religious being. It's very interesting. It's for him to say that the human is not primarily a moral, spiritual, aesthetic being, but primarily he activates a dimension of the universe. Now, if we lose that sensitivity, and that's almost the total meaning of Teilhard, almost the total meaning of Teilhard, he understood that. And not to understand that's to miss everything that's happened in the advance of human knowledge for the past few centuries. To understand it is to have a new revelatory experience. I think it's that significant and that important, because the issues we are dealing with now are not simple issues, but it's the question of life and death, of the biosphere and of the planet itself. In other words, we face ultimacy as no other people ever faced, and possibly from here on, every generation will face ultimacy, because, in a special way, because we now have the control, the humans have control of the survival or non-survival of the planet. And it's not total, and there's no way in which we would ever be able to extinguish life on the planet, but the extent of injury that we can inflict on it and the disruption we can cause would amount to devastation at a level that would be difficult to outline. So that at the present time, when I say that we're having a revelatory experience, it's the only way we can deal with it. There's no other way. And because the energy is to be evoked, and this is what I would get to later on today or tomorrow, is outlining specifically in a number of different categories just what this means in the different aspects of life, the commercial aspect, legal aspect, the educational aspect, religion, and so forth. So this that's the importance just now of what we're about. And you can understand why I say it's at a poignant moment with enormous possibilities, but we need a great unifying principles to deal with it. And this is why I'd just like to make one closing remark. It has to do with the cosmology, that the different cultures, when we move from the genetic coding or the biological coding to the cultural coding, we have to establish a context, and the context traditionally is cosmological. Genesis begins with the cosmology. You have to establish your cosmological basis. Now, a person mentioned that as regards peace and justice. Well, peace and justice, I think, can be enormously enhanced, and in fact cannot proceed much further unless they place the whole sense of peace and justice in a different context. Because if they just work out of the human, I ask people, I say, people, distribution of food, which is very important, has to be done. But I think our society is extensively, at least, occupied with the social issue. It's in our colleges, in our universities, it's in all our moral concerns and so forth. But if we're losing 6 billion tons of topsoil a year in the U.S., and we do that much longer, you're not going to be able to take care of anybody. So that for the people that are concerned with justice and with the plight of the poor and so forth, it's the same in the Philippines. The Philippines, the devastation of the area, of the resources, is such that a person can do all they want about the social process, but if something isn't done about the functioning, the biological functioning of those islands, if the soil is not preserved, well, it becomes irrelevant. It's like being in a lifeboat, and if something happens to the lifeboat, well, the distribution of food remains important, but if something happens to the boat that's not taken care of, everything becomes irrelevant. So there are these urgencies which I consider at least to require a new sensitivity to the cosmological issues and the place of the human in the functioning of the earth itself. So that is at least the type of contribution. It's not the whole picture, but Brian and myself both, I think, are considered that whatever small contribution we have to make, it would be in that general area, leaving room for an enormous amount of other contributions from other areas and other disciplines. So I'll leave you with that right now, and
Thomas Berry is a member of the Passionist Order. He's the founder and director for the Riverdale Center for Religious Research in Bronx, New York. Formerly a teacher at both Fordham and Columbia University, he's currently the president of the American Teilhard Desjardins Association.
There is an opposition to this type of pursuit, or to the general ecological orientation. We're considered to be, and it is intensified in the last few years. For a while, the ecologists during the 1970s advanced considerably. A few years ago, reactions began to set in, and there is a confrontation, just as we have been talking about confrontational approach, the transformational and the creative, so also there is an effort to convert us. It comes largely from those who are into the social order, and we are vulnerable, extremely vulnerable, because we do represent the certain bourgeois group of the citizenry. We are not the impoverished. We are not the outcasts. We are the better off people. Some of us more so, some of us less so, but still, in terms of the differences of people, we can afford the luxury of doing the things that we do. So there's rather much a feeling that environmentalists and ecologists are a group of elitists that are trying to protect their own interests, and they're really not the people ultimately to be trusted with the destinies of the human. There are two books particularly. There's one that's entitled The Environmental Hustle. The Environmental Hustle. I've forgotten the author of that. There is another one, I think that was put out, I think by MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology Press. I'm not entirely sure. There's another one that's called Progress and Privilege. And again, the presentation is that that people are trying to protect their own privileged status in the society. They've gotten their share, and they're trying to exclude other people from getting their share of things. And this particularly showed up when we had our meeting here in May with where some of the papers that I had written were given to theologians, several theologians and religious thinkers, and in one case particularly, one of the more distinguished of the religious thinkers of the Canadian world particularly, but in North America a highly recognized person, had difficulty appreciating this view of things. The idea was that you don't approach this. There are also several very strongly oriented people in the States who use the same approach. There is also a book that's written that I would recommend to you called Environmentalist Vanguard of the Future. This is a more sociological study of environmentally oriented people. I highly recommend that. It does give a picture of the movement